Hello, everybody. This is Ryan from I Try Running Programs, and today is a little bit more of a fun video. Probably keep it a little bit shorter, but I know that ChatGPT has been all the rage. It's certainly if you're somebody like me who works either in a field related to computer science. In my case, I've let this be known before, but I work in higher education. Most specifically, I work for an undergraduate program focused on computer science, and then a master's program focused on instructional design and education technology. So ChatGPT has been something that has been all the rage in our fields. And naturally, people in my neck of the woods are most concerned about it from using it to cheat on essays or using it to write code or program for them. But you can use ChatGPT for free. It's a fun little kind of AI language model, i.e., basically a chatbot that you can ask questions and it can give you data in return. Well, I've seen a few folks try to use it to create running programs, so I thought, shoot, why not? I'll try the same thing because naturally, as you can assume from my YouTube channel title or YouTube channel name, I suppose, I am somebody who likes to run and I like to try different training programs. And why be in the box when you can be outside of the box? And so I asked ChatGPT a relatively straightforward question of can you generate an 18-week marathon training program? Because most marathon training programs that I've done have been in around that 4 to 4.5 month range. And I do like to run 6 days a week. So I asked it to design a training program around that and let it know that I can run a 3:26 marathon. That's all the input that I gave it. Anybody who's used ChatGPT would know the output that you get from ChatGPT very much so depends on the types of questions you're asking. And the better your question, the better response you'll get. So as you can see, it starts off relatively simple, some easy days, a lot of easy running, to be quite frank. And the first long run is no longer than 8 miles and a couple of speed sessions. Nothing terribly crazy. And you can see that model stays the same for most of these weeks. I'll move a little slowly just so that you can see them, but essentially nothing really changes. Now, the other thing you will see is it never gives me a day off. That's the first, I could tell that was my first flaw with ChatGPT is I asked it to give me 6 days of running, but it had me run every day. And I don't think at any point it ever gives me a day off in this training cycle. So that was flaw number one in ChatGPT's response to me. But what gets really a lot more funny is as you get further down, you can see that the overall speed sessions get a little bit longer. I don't think any of them get terribly untenable, but they do add up to a lot of mileage plus speed work. So you can see that a lot is the first methodology that ChatGPT uses, which isn't necessarily negative. A lot of us will use a warm up and a cool down type of cycle with running as we're doing speed work. There's no harm, no foul there, but there is still a lot of mileage. And what you can start to see is it starts to double up on these long runs to the point that you're doing 11 on Saturday and you're following it up with 14 on Sunday and then 12 and 15 and on and on. You can see this continues down week after week after week. Well, what I really enjoyed is the end of the training cycle. You can really see how crazy it gets. Now, at first, its response ended at week 12. But at the end of week 12, it's recommended two runs on the weekend were a 17-mile easy run followed directly by a 24-mile easy run. And if you're somebody who's not as much into kind of the running kind of world, you would understand that the reality is most of the time we don't recommend people going over a 20-mile long run. And by we, I should just say really people who are far more advanced and far more well known in the running training world would never really recommend too many overtraining runs. You might do that if you're somebody who's running something like a ultra marathon or doing events that are in the 30, 50, 100-mile range or doing like a 24-hour run where you're just trying to run as much mileage within a given time frame as possible. Those could make sense to have some of those longer, really, really long runs. Because in short, and I guess for those who might be more novice runners viewing this channel, the more time on feet, the more likelihood of injury, right? And especially if a long run starts to go past kind of the 3 hour mark, and in some cases, really even 2 hour mark, you're starting to border the line of, am I getting a really good training stimulus that's safe, or am I getting a training stimulus that now puts me at great risk for injury? And that's where the issue would start to show here. with ChatGPT. Now, I asked it a follow-up question to essentially finish out the weeks of training. Because at first it only gave me 12 weeks. And this is not atypical. Sometimes ChatGPT just kind of stops in the middle of its response. But as you can see, this methodology continues to the point that you would have multiple times a week where you're in the double digits of mileage, and in some cases running up to 30 plus miles. And you can see where it really starts to get funny is in week 17 or 16, I should say, through week 18, where it's advocating running a 20-mile run day and following it with an over 30-mile run the next day. Now, naturally, the marathon distance is 26.2 miles. So it's asking to do some significant kind of over distance training, which, hey, maybe some people would advocate. That used to be somewhat popular, maybe more in like the 80s and 90s. And in some cases, from the reading that I've done, some Japanese running trainers would recommend that. I don't know if they would recommend this, but you could see where that could potentially be, once again, feasible depending on the type of race that you're doing. But if you look at that final week there, week 18, it is just a wild week where you go from an easy run of 3 miles to 12 miles with 2 by 1200 meters at marathon pace, followed by an easy run of 3 miles. Then Thursday was 16 miles with 4 by 400 meter at 5K pace, and then a ton of easy mileage. So ChatGPT is essentially advocating for an insane amount of mileage, a very high mileage training program with 2 speed days, and really not a lot of fast running. This, in theory, the overall kind of that methodology may not be bad for a novice to an intermediate runner. Okay. And I would consider myself probably an intermediate runner. That could make sense, I suppose, from that perspective. The amount of mileage, though, is quite insane because it's really advocating for somewhere in the neighborhood here, if I'm getting my numbers correct, somewhere around 80 to 90 miles. That's not crazy for somebody who's a very advanced runner. But for most of us, that would probably be overkill because that amount of easy mileage is probably, it's going to have some, you're going to have a heck of a base that you're going to build off of there. Certainly a very large anaerobic base over time, probably more of an aerobic base over time with if you added more speed training. But it's so much mileage. It's pretty crazy. So I asked it a follow-up question. Could you modify the plan and have no runs over 20 miles? And you can see it tries to improve upon this a little bit just with the final 6 weeks here. It didn't give me the immediate earlier weeks, but it falls into that same trap where there's still a lot of days where it's having you do a Saturday and Sunday with 20 miles back to back. So once again, could I ask it to refine itself even further and say, hey, have 3 days of speed work and no, only one long run in a week or one, no other runs besides one long run, and they all have to be under, 15 miles. You can kind of see where I'm going with the further questioning. So if you're going to use something like an AI language model to modify your training, by all means, you certainly can. You're just going to have to ask it a lot of refining questions. But I did think this was funny that out of the first training program it recommended to me was a ton of mileage, and certainly a lot of easy mileage. So I can pretty safely say this year I will not be using ChatGPT to design my training, but it was a kick nonetheless to ask it some questions. So if you're somebody who's using ChatGPT to train, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to see the training program that it created for you. As somebody who works in education, I will continue to use ChatGPT, but I won't be using it as an athlete, that's for sure. So I hope you got a kick out of it at least as much as I did. It had me laughing to tears at one point while I was in my office asking it questions. But ultimately, I'd love to hear from people who have tried to use ChatGPT for similar things. So with all that being said, take care, and I hope your training's going great.